This is Lisa from Mobile Tech Review, and this is art and photo editing apps for the iPad Pro and also for the 2018 iPad with pencil. Because doing art without something like a pencil is kind of hard, so that's why we're going to focus on those. Obviously, for photo editing, any old iPad's going to do. That's relatively modern and has a horsepower. We're going to do it now. Before we get started, I just want to give a shout out to our sponsor, Paperlike. So they make matte screen protectors for your iPad, and you know, I have tried like every single one out there, the iCares, the Japanese imports, and they're either kind of grainy and murky, or the pencil doesn't work for the latest generation iPad Pro so well because you really need to have a thin one. This just really works very well. I've been using this for about a week and it's holding up well so far. The clarity on this is nice, and the pencil feel, this is a must, particularly if you're doing digital painting and drawing. That whole ice skating thing that the Apple Pencil does on the glossy screen just ain't what you want. So this really helps with that, and it feels, well, literally a bit more paper-like. So the first up for painting mostly is Procreate, and that's no surprise. You've probably seen a lot of other artists on YouTube who are using Procreate. In general, a lot of folks who are even professional artists, when they want to draw and sketch on their iPad, they're using Procreate. So why is that? Well, first off, the import function. You can import from any file browser that you've got installed on your iPad. You can actually get stuff from OneDrive, from iCloud, from any network attached storage you have. So that makes it a little bit easier to get stuff on and off, which is always one of those issues with the iPad. But really the biggest reason is the brush engine. This is for painting and for drawing digitally, right? So the brush engine on this is just amazing. Most of these are actually built in. And that's nice that you have a great selection, right? But how good are they actually? Let's pick something like, let's look for a gouache. That's pretty hard to do digitally. And we're going to pick a contrasting color like crazy bright like this. Yeah, let's do this. Now look at the textures. That is pretty darn gouache for those of you who know natural media. So the strokes are very good on that. It's pretty easy to do things like you want to change your brush size right here. You want to change the opacity right here. Left-handed, right-handed, it doesn't really matter. Now this does have a learning curve, and they have an excellent manual, which is well over 100 pages, but it's worth it, trust me. It doesn't work like Photoshop or anything you know, but some of the user interface paradigms have already become so standard that you're seeing them in other applications. For example, the undo paint stroke, just 2 seconds. Once you get used to that, I just start doing this in every program, and it's pretty darn wonderful. You want to make a straight line, let's switch to sketching brush. And instead of trying to do it with a ruler, you just hold, boom. Makes a straight line. You want to make a circle, press and hold. There it is, circle. So lots of good stuff like that. We have layer support right here. The performance on this is excellent, even with large images with 20 layers on it. You know, you can go up to 3K, 4K if you want to on an iPad Pro 12.9 inch, for example. It's all good stuff. We have a smudge tool here, and some of the things that were missing before they finally added, like cropping the entire canvas. It's hard to imagine, actually, that they didn't have that feature before, but they do now. And you've got things, opacity, blur, perspective for motion blur, that sort of stuff, color balance, curves, the basics that you would expect to have if you're used to drawing inside of Photoshop are there. Not everything, of course, that you would find in Photoshop. And with all these programs, you want to rotate, you want to pinch, you want to zoom. Everything that we're looking at here, we have that functionality. So that's kind of a given. Next up, we're going to cover a couple of applications, and for those of you who are perhaps used to programs on the desktop and want to have something similar, Sketchbook is pretty much a carbon copy of the desktop version, including things like you got symmetry right here. So say I want to start drawing like that, and I want the nose. No problem with symmetry anymore, right? So you get the idea. This is not my favorite brush engine by any means when it comes to painting, but some of you really like this a lot. This is particularly good for those of you who like to do architectural style work, or you're doing cars. You get the idea. Not so much fine art sort of painting. A bit, it's decent for comics. I probably would lean towards Procreate still for that, but it's pretty decent. Then there's ArtRage. This one's pretty popular on the desktop too, and it has very painterly-like tools. There's no just real serious blending tool in this, because a lot of these just have that kind of natural media effect where paint blurs into paint. But we do have things like a sampling tool, like say this poor guy here, he's kind of missing a nose, right? So I'm going to sample his nose, and then I'm going to use the pencil, because that's pretty precise, to draw him a nose. It's still doing a little bit of that blending thing, but at least the poor fella has a nose right now. So you have an airbrush tool, you've got your eraser, you've got a paint out of the tube, which is kind of a neat effect. It's how you can get some of that modeled stuff. If you want to change the tool size, you can either tap right here and type in a number, or you can just drag up and then drag the little slider over there. So this one has that kind of interesting effect. One thing I would say is I would like more tools in this that are kind of really big for filling the canvas. That's not what we have right here with most any of these tools. Even this big roller brush is pretty, yeah, it's a decent size, but that's the only one that's about that big. This one supports layers as well, and you've got a very simple import-export going on with this program. Not as fancy as Procreate, but pretty nice natural media if you're used to painting oil, acrylic, that sort of thing. Nice brush engine for that. Next up is Affinity Photo. Now they also have Affinity Designer. For those of you who are vector artists and looking for an Adobe Illustrator substitute, that one is pretty darn good. Right now, Adobe's Photoshop and Illustrator iPad apps, they are not all that. In 2019, they're supposed to come up with a pretty good Photoshop app, at least. But this one is also a photo editor, and I prefer to use it as that. And the tools are not exactly the way Photoshop works, but it's pretty darn intuitive. And you've got, again, things like layers, all sorts of effects. They have what they call personas here. So this is like the photo editing persona right there. And so if you want to actually go ahead and do something, you've got a set of tools here. So if I want to do a fill tool or a paintbrush tool, that sort of thing, I can do that. Then we've got our selection tool if you just want to work, or you got marching ants, on a certain section of it. And this one here is liquefy, so not so much probably, but if you think the horse's butt needs to be a little bit bigger and longer, you can do that sort of thing. And this one here for photo editors is really what you're looking at. If you want to do things like clarity, which is a familiar thing from Photoshop these days, basically it's local contrast kind of thing. You've got that. You've got your vibrance versus contrast. Vibrance is always a nicer, more subtle way to bring things up. And you can type in a numerical value. And if you bring it up and you just want to go back to 0 really quick, you can also just double tap to do that as well. And obviously, yes, you can use your finger if you want to do your tint, your color, your shadows. Again, we've got layers here, we have a histogram. There's a lot of tools here that really make this about as close as I've seen it to Photoshop on the go for the iPad. The brush engine on this is okay. It is not my favorite. Some people do paint in this. I would choose Procreate for that, but if you're working on photo retouching as opposed to full-out painting, then definitely the brush engine on this is just fine. And performance is pretty good on this. This is actually a raw file from a 24 megapixel Sony a7 III camera, and yeah, good. Next up for photo editing is Lightroom CC. Here is a place where Adobe actually did do a good job, though I'm still not so in love with their import-export. The easiest way to do this is basically import things from your photo roll that are on your iPad. So if you can import your raw photos right into your Photos app on your iPad and then grab them from here. So you get the most features here if you do happen to have a Creative Cloud subscription. This is free to download and you get the basic set of features, but the full Monty is going to come when you have your Creative Cloud subscription. By the way, all the programs I've been showing you are $20 or less, which is pretty darn affordable compared to desktop programs. So with this, if you're familiar with Lightroom, you've got just about the same thing. You've got your roll here of images. You've got color profiles up here, and there are quite a few, including, pretty strong ones, pretty artistic sort of ones, and then the regular Adobe color profiles that you're probably used to now having in Lightroom. For color, we've got our temperature, we've got our vibrance, we've got all of the effects that you would expect to see here. Color, noise reduction, sharpening. So we can really jazz up this photo just like you would on desktop Lightroom. Now, you don't get the same plugin support that you do with desktop Lightroom, but other than that, it's pretty good. I mean, you've got lens corrections over here, chromatic aberration control for your optics, a little bit of sharpening. Now, this one needs a bit more on the color. I would definitely give this a little bit more vibrance and a little saturation. A little bit more sharpening. See what I mean? This is going to be a very nice, vivid photo, just the way you would do on the desktop. It's a pretty excellent experience for those of you who are already accustomed to Lightroom and just need straight photo editing, no retouching, no pencil support, anything like that. Now, obviously, there are even more programs to choose from, and some of the, again, if you're used to the desktop version, we have Metabang Paint and Pixelmator, which has just about all the features that you have on the desktop here. Notice I don't have a whole lot of 3D programs installed. Most of those are pretty expensive and subscription-based, and that's a whole nother can of worms. And when it comes to video editing, though, this isn't about that. I know a lot of you are thinking about that. If you're not happy with the built-in iMovie and you want something more, LumaFusion is really powerful stuff. It is... They're to the point where they even have things like LUTs here, lookup tables for your colors, lots of editing going on here for your soundtracks, for your video tracks, for your effects, for grading. It's pretty darn amazing, really. The only complaint I have about it is it's still just kind of a hell to get large quantities of media, say if you're shooting a 4K video, on and off of an iPad.